If you've been wanting to launch your podcast for any length of time, but felt stuck on all the small but very important decisions, such as, is this a good podcast name? Should I interview this particular guest? What equipment do I need? How will I fit podcasting into my life? And so on. There's something special I have in store for you. It is so great that I even decided to break my own podcasting CTA rule and pop in before the start of the episode, so I'll be super quick. You can have any and all of your podcasting questions answered and get my feedback and advice tailored to you specifically for 2 weeks straight. That's direct one-to-one access for 2 weeks while we build your new podcast together. To grab one of the remaining 4 spots at this price, that'll go up by 40% in the next round, click the first link you see in the show notes, the one that says limited offer and has a little police car light emoji. Okay, thanks for sticking around. Let's get to the episode. Before we jump in, here's a quick note. If you haven't listened to my previous conversation with today's guest, Corinne McKay, I would highly recommend going back to it after or before listening to this one. In that episode, Corinne and I explored why repurposing your existing content can be one of the smartest podcasting strategies, and we challenged the idea that reusing your own work is somehow quote-unquote cheating, which is not. And today we're taking the next step and getting really practical. So here's a quick refresher. Corinne has been freelancing since 2002 and runs a podcast called Training for Translators, which is built entirely from content she's already created. So she can produce an episode in about an hour a month because she has a monthly podcast. She loves keeping her workflow really simple and has become a master of doing more with what she already has. So in this episode, we're getting into the practical side, how to choose what to repurpose, how to turn one piece of content into multiple podcast episodes, and how to build a workflow that's efficient enough that you will actually stick with it. Corinne is amazing, and I'm positive you will walk away with a list of new ideas you can implement to your future show that is actually more within reach than you initially thought. Let's go. This is Say Yes to Podcasting, where solopreneurs learn how to start podcasts that attract their ideal clients and do the marketing for them. I'm your host, Anja Lordanic. Say yes to podcasting today. In our previous episode, Corinne and I talked about the benefits of repurposing, the what and the why, if you will. And now we're going to take things a bit further and make things practical. So we're going to talk about how to turn your existing ideas and posts and content into podcast episodes. And the keyword here is efficiently. And I would also add sustainably. So most of us, mentors, coaches, educators, we already have some sort of an online presence, whether that's a blog, a YouTube channel, a podcast, a newsletter, or an active LinkedIn or Instagram profile. So what would you say, how can we decide which pieces of content are actually worth turning into podcast episodes?
Yeah, so I'd say the first place to start is what are people reacting to? So, for example, my podcast is based on my newsletter, and at the end of every newsletter, I invite people to just reply to the email if there's something that they want to tell me. And if I get an unusually high number of reactions or say comments when I post it on my blog or on LinkedIn, then I'll definitely select that as something that would be good for a podcast episode. And I'll even say that in the episode. You know, like I got a really positive response to this as a newsletter / blog post article, so I picked it for a podcast. Then I think you want to think about what lends itself to an audio format. Like nothing that I write is particularly graphical. Nothing really depends on images, but don't do stuff that depends on images that you're going to have to describe. You know, so if you have something that is more visual, don't do stuff that you're going to have to describe.
Unless you're an amazing storyteller or describer.
Yeah, right.
Some people can do that.
Right. They say like the pictures are better on the radio. You know what I mean? There are people who really can do that. And then I think about length. And again, just personal preference. but I think that an episode of around 20 minutes is kind of perfect. I do listen, I have a few favorite podcasts that go an hour or longer, but I think especially if you're looking to increase your listener base, because this is part of your business strategy, I think around 20 minutes is good. So I think all those three factors are what I would think about.
Agreed. I believe 20 minutes is more than enough for you to convey the message you wanted to convey, to talk about the main topic, and then expand on it with a couple of points, weave in a couple of personal stories, maybe. And if you talk more than, I don't know, 40 to 50 minutes by yourself, there might be listener fatigue on the other
It's a
end.
lot, right? That's a
It's a
lot
lot.
of time to just listen to one person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to be really engaging and a great
Yes.
storyteller, which I don't believe I am. So I keep my episodes pretty short and to the
I
point.
disagree with you, but I think 20 minutes is good. Yeah.
Yeah, we can agree on that and agree to disagree on the other bit.
Hmm.
So can you walk us through your own process of creating podcast episodes? I know you mentioned that you repurpose your episodes from your blog posts,
Right.
but what happens between identifying an existing piece of content, a blog post, and publishing a finished podcast episode?
Hmm. So I'd pick the post and then I would skim it over and see if there's anything that needs to be updated, like to say, since I wrote this post, here's what's actually changed.
Mm.
Or anything that doesn't really lend itself to a lot to the audio format. Like, did I put a lot of links in the post that then I'm going to need to explain what the link is? Then I record it. I'm kind of an audio quality fanatic. So by the way, I'm not using my podcast microphone for this. I'm using my interpreting headset, but I use a
And no one
Shure.
can tell.
Yeah, I use a Shure MV7 Plus microphone because I'm kind of a audio quality snob. So I think a good podcast microphone is a necessity. So I recorded in Audacity, and I don't know what editing software you use, Anya, but I record it in Audacity, which is free. And then I do an automated editing pass in Audacity. I'm a very heavy breather. It's like too many years of doing intense yoga that, like, if you tell me to breathe, I'm going to freaking breathe. so, as you, because I can see on the video that you do this too, Anya, that if you want to get that sort of radio announcer sound, you have to put the microphone really close to your mouth. So somebody told me, like, put your fist in front of your mouth and then put the microphone on the other side of your fist. And that's how close you want the microphone to your mouth if you don't want any room echo and you really want that like radio announcer sound. But the thing is that then it picks up everything, all of your like breathing and swallowing. So I do an automated editing pass in Audacity where, and just, for your listeners who are audio nerds, I put a noise gate filter in Audacity where it filters out any noise below 25 decibels. And I find that eliminates like most of the breathing and swallowing. And then you just delete the dead air, right? So you don't have the breathing and swallowing noises are replaced by silence, which is easier because then you can just delete that or not. Then I go through and do a manual editing pass. Like I listen to the whole thing and pause and take out anything else I want. I don't do a separate intro or outro. So that's a whole thing that you could talk about that I just don't even do. Like the podcast, I have like really pared this down because the intro of the podcast is me saying, "Hi, this is Corinne McKay. Welcome to episode 26 of the Training for Translators podcast." And then I publish it to Libsyn. So I host my podcast on Libsyn. I put it on Libsyn and that gets it on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the major podcast feeds. Then I post it to my blog, my own newsletter, and LinkedIn. And I do think that if I bumped up the number of episodes, I'd think about hiring an audio editor. I'm not the greatest audio editor. So I think that's the first thing that I would think about outsourcing is the editing, but that's what I do.
I like your process because it is very streamlined, it is very simple, and I don't want people to apologize for keeping things simple because
Right.
that's an art form nowadays.
Yes.
Because
And
we tend to overcomplicate things.
And like I said before, now that the first episode took me a lot longer than that, but now that I have the process dialed in, I can do an episode start to finish in about an hour, not much more than an hour. So if your listeners are looking at like, how long would this take me? I can generate a whole episode in about an hour.
Yeah. And that is an important piece of information, I think, for the listeners, because people, as I said, tend to overcomplicate things and think that recording a podcast episodes needs to be an entire session. Whenever you feel ready, you need to have the idea inside your head, you need to have bullet points. Yes, you need to be prepared, but you don't need to make it an entire event, because that way you're not going to do that. And
Exactly.
especially, let me not get started on video, because that's a
Oh,
whole
God.
different ball game. And
Yes.
we're keeping things simple. We're on audio, we're on video right now, just so we can see each other and maybe use some of the clips in the future, but we
Mm-hmm.
are not overly worried about the video component right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but just to sort of inspire your listeners who think like, oh, if I want to start doing a podcast weekly, now I have to allocate maybe one entire day of my week to doing the podcast, because I'm going to do the interview in the morning and then I'm going to edit it in the afternoon. And I'll just tell you, like, do that if you want to. If you have the time, go for it. I love listening to podcasts that are like heavily produced, that sound like the soundtrack to a TV show. I listen to, many podcasts like that. But I also think if you want to keep it really simple, just as a way to offer people another option for consuming your information, you can do it in an hour per episode.
Exactly. I wanted to share something that I believe is really important for my listeners to know, because we're all business owners, we're all busy. And even for those who are not taking care of other humans or pets, they are all time constrained. And the fact that you mentioned keeping content creation in terms of your podcast under an hour is very reassuring. And I would add another important thing, because I believe this is a hack, even though I don't like using that word, but we're in the middle of it right now. We're recording an interview, a podcast interview in one go, but I'm going to turn it into two podcast episodes.
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
beforehand, we agreed on some questions on a broad topic, the what and the why in the first episode, the how in the second episode. And this is how I will have two episodes ready to go in one
Mm-hmm.
sitting.
Mm-hmm.
That means 2 weeks worth of content for me, and two opportunities for you to share your content that was created in, I don't know, this will take 40 minutes in total, with your
Mm-hmm.
audience who are
Right.
also podcast listeners. And you can
Right.
use this content for your own show to inspire
Yes.
your listeners, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So if someone is planning ahead, as we gave some examples before, how can they create content realistically today so that it's easier to repurpose it tomorrow?
Mm-hmm. So I think it depends on how much and what kind of repurposing you want to do. But one thing that I thought could help people really expand on what they have is, we all know that like lists are kind of a hot way to share information. Like 5 things every beginning business owner needs to do, 8 ways to find a new client. And I actually thought I should do this because you could take each of those tips and make it into its own episode. That wouldn't be hard at all. Like if you've got, 8 things that every business owner who needs more clients should do, you could easily talk about each of those 8 ways for 15 minutes. So take that. So I think in addition to just repurposing, we can even go beyond. We can even create even less work for ourselves by saying, I just, because as a matter of fact, the episode I did yesterday was 4 ways I found a new client in the past year. And I actually thought, if I wanted to step my podcast up to once a week, which is something I keep thinking about, that could have been a month of content, because I could have easily talked for 15 minutes about each of the 4 ways. So that's something I would say is not only repurpose, but subdivide, right? like,
Mm.
like we're going beyond repurposing into subdividing and saying, what is a piece of content that you have that could even be made into like 3 to 5 podcast episodes?
Yeah, and that's a great way of looking at it, not only because you're creating more content. We're just for the record, we are not creating more content just so we can say that we're creating more content to be
No.
more prolific, but to provide our audiences, no matter how small or big they are, with bite-sized pieces of content. Because
Yes.
as we all know, we are inundated with information nowadays. And the
Yes.
fact that you can share those 4 tips, you can divide them into 4 separate podcast episodes. Your listeners will walk away with 1 tip each week or each month that
Right.
they might realistically implement.
Yes, right. That I actually thought, if I had thought about it ahead of time, I could have said at the start, this is a blog post I wrote with 4 ways I found new clients, but I'm going to release each one as its own podcast episode. It's going to be maybe even under 10 minutes, but so you can hear this one strategy and then take action on it. That like I don't do my podcast in a particularly strategic way. It's more to give my people who would rather listen a way to listen to things. But if I think about getting more strategic with it, I think that would be a way, something for your listeners to think about.
Yeah. And another question you just reminded me of is, do you then think strategically about your episode titles, or not really, because you already know that your audience is familiar with your work?
Right. No, another good thing that I could put on my list, but I just use the blog post title.
Yeah.
I already titled the blog post, or the subject line of my newsletter. And so I just used the exact same text that was the subject line of the newsletter and the title of the blog post.
Yeah, but they work in the same vein. They're like of similar nature, because you want your email subject lines to be attractive, which means that your podcast titles, episode titles will be attractive as well.
Right. So in that sense, I've already thought it through, in that by definition, the email subject line is not going to be like 50 words. I've already come up with a like quote unquote catchy title for this piece of content because I did that for the email subject line.
Yeah. And podcast episode titles can be a bit longer. I tend to take advantage of that, not just because I want to attract listeners and new listeners, but also because I want to take advantage of SEO and use 2 to 3 strategic keywords in there, not stuff them, but use them strategically. So episode titles can handle more words than the email subject lines. So we talked about all the benefits and things you actually implement, but what about some mistakes you see or you can predict people will make when they try to repurpose content for their podcasts?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is like, don't apologize for what you're doing. Just tell people, I wanted to give you a different way to absorb the information. Or, after I wrote this post about 5 things every new business owner should do, I actually realized that I could easily talk for 15 minutes about each of those 5 ways. So I'm going to do that. So I think just, be honest about what you're doing instead of thinking, like you said, Anya, like, oh, this is so lazy that I can't even be bothered to like find guests for my thing. I think that the other really nice thing about one nice thing about the fact that there are not a lot of easy ways to react to a podcast is people who don't want to listen to it will just move on. It's not like a LinkedIn post where people can tell you in the comments that they hate you. Like people can't really do that with a podcast. And that's one thing that I kind of enjoy, is that people who, if it's not for them, they just move on.
Exactly. And if you hear enthusiasm in someone's voice, and if you know, or you can kind of tell that a lot of work went into something, and then after all of that, you decide to send them an email or a comment on something that they did in a mean way, that's just mean. So that doesn't say anything about you anyway.
Precisely. Right. Yeah.
So let's say we are talking to busy solopreneurs, which a lot of us are, and we are all trying to be streamlined and strategic and sustainable. We want to spend time with our families, is what I'm trying to say. But also someone might want to start with this approach as soon as possible when they hear what you just shared. So what's the one thing you would recommend they start with?
I think just focus on what feels doable. I'm a big believer, like I've been a freelancer since 2002, so I've gone through a lot of experimentation and reinvention and things like that. And I think the main thing is I become a big believer in like the minimum viable product. Like it's okay to start small and see what works and then adapt. So if you have today a decent microphone and a way to record, and like I said, I record in Audacity, which is free, and I'm not an audio engineer person at all. So if I can learn how to record basic audio in Audacity, so can you. And so I think start out with what feels doable, like something that you could start today and then build. Because I think weirdly enough, a lot of people, particularly when they decide to diversify their business, they aim too high. That sounds weird, but I think a lot of people fail because of over ambition, because they think I'm going to start out with a weekly podcast with guests, for example. That's something that to me, I'm like, no, no, and no. We're not going to. I mean, and again, if you have the time and the resources and the energy, like seeing what you've now done with, your podcasting initiatives, Anya, I'm super impressed. And it seems like something that really, for lack of a less woo-woo way to put it, it really resonates for you. That it's something that combines a lot of things that you enjoy and are good at, and that you've really, dove into it, which I think is fantastic. But I think for the person who thinks, I would just like to have a podcast as another arm of my business, don't start with a weekly interview podcast. Start with a monthly podcast that's just you talking. So I think that I would embrace the kind of minimum viable product approach and think what feels doable to me. Like I think the main thing that I thought of when my newsletter readers had been asking for a podcast is that I thought at the start, I cannot create any new content. I already post completely different things in my newsletter and on LinkedIn. And I post to LinkedIn. I post substantive stuff to LinkedIn like 3 to 5 times a week. So that's fairly time consuming. And I thought, okay, rule number 1, no new content for the podcast. And I think accept that you may feel some pressure to not do that. I've had a number of people who I would really like to have as guests ask to be guests on my podcast. And I'm not a person who has an easy time saying no. And I just said no. That I said, I would love to keep you on a list for the future, but right now what works for me is to just squeeze in an hour when I have an hour to record a podcast episode. So I think thinking about that from the start is what will make it, like the word you used, Anya, you make it sustainable for you.
I really like your approach, and that's exactly how I try to look at things myself, and most importantly, how I try to advise my clients, because you are exactly putting into words what I say to them. Because if you want to start a podcast and you decide to do that, I need to start a podcast, and you don't break it up into smaller steps, of course it's overwhelming. Of course you're going to procrastinate on doing that for another year. But if you know that your potential listeners, who are also your potential leads and clients, if they are podcast listeners, and you know that you can convey knowledge using this medium well, because you're already using it in coaching calls and group calls anyway. Why wouldn't you start with what you already have?
Right.
Or expand on what you've already created. So you don't need to go through a client call and then publish it as a podcast episode. That wouldn't be ethical. But you can extract certain ideas from that call. As you said, 4 tips, you can create 4 episodes. Because I'm pretty sure in 1 hour of a consult call, you've shared more than 4 tips with your client.
Right. Or like your clients who, exactly. If you have any content from your own clients, like your client, your own podcasting clients who are like coaches or therapists or something like that, to say, I've made a list of the 10 most common things that people ask me about, and I'm just going to talk for, 8 minutes about each of those top 10 things, So right there, you've got 2.5 months of podcasting episodes.
Yeah. And just to end this episode, I would like to share a few more things, which I believe are really important, and I don't want them to go unsaid. if you are afraid that you're going to repeat the same message too many times, that people are going to get sick of you, that is in 100% cases not the case,
There's
because
no such thing.
there
There's
is
no
no
such
such
thing.
thing.
Right.
If you're
Right.
kind of getting sick of the ideas you're sharing, you might be onto something. People might
Hmm.
be receiving your message or getting to know you or associate you with a certain word. So don't be
Hmm.
afraid of repeating yourself.
Hmm.
Do
Great
you
note to
have
end on.
anything?
Thanks.
Yeah. Do you have any other tips to share? Any like quick tips that have been on your mind, but you haven't had the chance to share today?
No, I think you ask perfect questions. And I think um, when you think about what media you might want to use for your own business, I think just think of all of the different profiles you might have in your own business and how they like to consume information. So, for example, I'm just an audio person. I listen to podcasts and audiobooks constantly. Like if I'm driving, cleaning, exercising, folding laundry, I'm always listening to something. And I hate video. I mean, I don't hate video. I like watching movies and TV, but I would never like sit there and watch a YouTube video for entertainment. But
Mm.
right out there is someone who is the total opposite of you. Like I had a student tell me the other day that she lives by herself, and she told me that she had gotten into this bad habit of not eating real meals and like just grazing, instead of eating
Mm.
real meals. And she said, what turned it around is I started watching recorded webinars while I'm cooking and eating. So now I watch 1 to 2 hours a day of recorded webinars, and that's how I, cook and eat. So I think just think in the modern world of like all the use cases that maybe you have, moms with kids at home who say, like, I spend half my life sitting in my car waiting for my kids at soccer practice. And so now I watch recorded webinars while I sit in my car, that
Yeah.
I think like just think of all of those different use cases and try to provide something for all of those people.
Yeah. Is that habit stacking that James Clear calls it that way? I believe so. I
Right,
I think I
exactly.
heard it
Yeah.
from him. Yeah.
Right. That's what I try to do. Like I do that with audio that for one thing I try to do is walk for an hour every weekday. And so I listen to audiobooks while I'm walking. And so I think like, this is something that I would normally think of as like an indulgence, sit there for an hour and listen to an audiobook, but I do it while I'm, taking a break and walking. So yeah, think of all of those things. Like think of your person who thinks, how I motivate myself to cook a real dinner instead of eating chips straight out of the bag is because I watch somebody's recorded online training. And I think that's the beauty of all of the information media that we have in the modern world. And think about offering something to all of those people in your audience.
Yeah. And audio is a super flexible medium. And I believe people have more time to listen to podcasts than they think. But whoever
Yes,
is listening to this knows that, and they are podcast consumers. So just if you don't have a podcast yet, just imagine yourself being that person for someone else who is providing that valuable information, who is essentially a part of your listener's day. And I think that's very
exactly.
rewarding and intimate and kind of sweet.
Yes, perfect. Perfect note to end on.
Thank you so much, Corinne. This was very informative for me, and I believe it will be for my listeners as well.
Fantastic. Can't wait to hear it live.
I hope today's conversation showed you that launching and maintaining a podcast does not have to mean consistently creating something new and starting from scratch every time. Sometimes the smartest strategy is simply making better use of what you've already created. And if there is one thing I would love for you to take away after listening to this episode, it is this. Please do not wait until you have the perfect plan or unlimited time. Start with what you have right now, with what's doable, stay consistent, and let your podcast grow alongside your business. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next week. Same time, same place, because I sure hope that this podcast has become part of your routine now, as Corinne and I mentioned. And if it did, make sure to let me know because I will be flying on cloud nine for the rest of the year. Okay, now I'm done. I will see you next week.